This episode of Troxel is supported by Confluence, which is now more than a conference. It's also a video podcast where AEC industry software developers take us behind the scenes and share their design and decision-making process to show how they made the tools we all use to design the built environment. It's available on YouTube and Spotify. Follow the link in the show notes and subscribe today. This episode of Troxel is supported by Avail. Avail helps AECO firms better manage, organize, and navigate information faster. Visit getavail.com today. Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. I have a little bit of housekeeping to do here before the intro. It's a reminder, this podcast and YouTube show are made possible by sponsorships. And I've got sponsorship slots open right now. If you'd like to get your message out to the Troxel audience and support the show, please visit trxl.co/sponsor to learn more and get in touch. This show is also supported by memberships. To learn more about how you as a listener can directly support what I'm doing here via membership, please visit troxel.co. That's trxl.co. and click on one of the many subscribe buttons on the site. There are a lot of things that I want to be able to do with Troxel, and that can only happen with sponsorships and memberships. All right. In this episode, I welcome the journalist, publisher, and conference director, Martyn Day. You likely know of Martyn through his critical and opinionated writing and publishing at AEC magazine, both in print and online, and as the host of the Next Build and Next Dev conferences. I'll note right here that this episode is part one of our very long, wide-ranging conversation, and I'll also say that this is exactly what I love about podcasting as a long-form type of media. Martyn says in this conversation that he writes long, as do I, and that his thinking is unstructured. And that actually lends itself very well to podcasting. It's one of the only ways that we can actually do that anymore, besides the kind of writing that Martyn actually does at AEC Mag. But I also acknowledge that I'm attempting to weigh the appetite of what constitutes an episode for my listeners, so I've decided to break this one up into two parts. In this conversation, we delve into the current state of AEC tech and specifically focus on our challenges, potential avenues for growth that exist within the industry, and cover an amazing amount of valuable insight into the industry's dynamics. As you might expect to hear from Martyn's global perspective on AEC tech, SolidWorks, CATIA, ArchiCAD, Revit, Navisworks, AutoCAD, Inventor, Rhino and Grasshopper, Onshape, Nemetschek, Snaptrude, Arcol, Adobe Creative Cloud, Serif Affinity, Swap, SketchUp, BricsCAD, MicroStation, Speckle, Building Smart and IFC, IFC.js, OpenUSD, NVIDIA Omniverse, Spaces, now rebranded as CodeDesign, Enscape, Rayon, Figma, Finch 3D, and Hypar were all mentioned during our conversation. And for a bit more context around the conversation before we get into it, we discuss the lack of a standard workflow in AEC, Martyn's work on Next Build and Next Dev conferences, similar challenges in the Mechanical CAD ecosystem to that of AEC, the future of Revit, problems with the shift to the cloud, the importance of IT and digital practice leadership roles, software business models, concerns about data security, BIM 2.0, and the dynamics of VC funding. We also touch on the impact of AI tools, the automation of 2D drawings, and the link between design and fabrication, or lack thereof. This is a big conversation, and it's only the first half. So, without further ado, I bring you part one of my marathon conversation with Martyn Day. Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you.
It's been a long time coming. I know you've been very busy. I've been consuming the Next Dev videos that were recently put on demand. I linked to those in some of my newsletters as well to hopefully get other eyeballs on those, which is cool.
Yep.
A lot of great information in there, and I would love to talk about the conference and like where that came from, but also just kind of takeaways from this most recent one for sure. But
Yeah.
Talk about your role, what you're doing, and then let's talk about your research project that you embarked on a few years ago, because I can definitely speak to that as well.
So I've been writing about computer-aided design, BIM, since I was 22, I think. So we're getting on for 30 plus years. When I started, my father was an engineer, and he told me I was going to be an engineer. So I went, okay. I was pretty good at maths, and I was interested in science. So that wasn't a bad idea. But when I went to university, all my friends turned out to be architects, and I loved what they were doing. And because they couldn't use CAD, I used to model their designs, help model their designs in AutoCAD at the time, and get involved on that side. So I was kind of part in their projects. And it was actually a time when they got marked down if they did their designs in CAD and not drawing.
Right.
So, and that wasn't too, but it was an interesting start point. And I thought then maybe I'd like to be an architect. And then I realized it was 7 years plus. And there was a hulking recession in the 80s. And so I thought, yeah, maybe not. So I just carried on. And I had to take had to pick a third option, and I picked publishing, which is kind of weird because I didn't really read that much. And it was fantastic. I sat in the first lecture for 2 hours. This guy waffled on. He had corduroy jacket, corduroy tie, corduroy trousers, brown shoes, hair over his eyes. And after 2 hours, I wrote one line, which was, "Don't publish a book if no one wants it. You'll make a loss." And I was like, "Oh, I can do this." So then I got into publishing. But they had all the machines that could print and stuff. And I was like, "Oh, right, machines, I loved it." Yeah. So that kind of gave me the spark. And then various engineering jobs, I kind of ended up writing about CAD in London. And I started at the bottom as a staff writer. So I was getting all the press releases and meeting Autodesk, the kind of like these mythical people behind the software that I was pretty much, that was my thing, trained to use. AutoCAD Release 12 was my thing. I could use that without any interface on it. I was totally into it. And then kind of rolling forward, I think Release 13 came out, and that was a real test because it was kind of a moral quandary of, I've got this magazine, I write for this magazine, and Autodesk has released this pile of rubbish, and I've been very nice about the pile of rubbish because everyone could tell me to ignore the machines it was running on. They were saying, "Oh, yeah, it's on a 486 with 16 gigs of RAM," which at the time was like the 50 the megabyte. It's like 15 grams worth of computer.
Right.
I said, "Yeah, fine. Oh, looks great. 3D modeling, AEC, fantastic." And then I had all these little bench tests I'd written, and I was finding it was 1,000% slower, or it was actually crashing. And I was like, And I sent it into Autodesk in the UK and said, "Look, this is what I'm finding. This is really bad." And they said, "We guarantee that all the things that you're finding will be fixed." I rang a friend of mine and I said, this is pretty bad. These aren't going to be fixed, are they?" And they went, "No." And so luckily my publisher said, "Yeah, write what you want." So I did 10 pages, something stupid on how bad this was, and then that just set off a bomb. It was pretty epic, and so suddenly I was at the real end of journalism, which I'd never really set out to do, which is kind of like get involved. So I kind of feel that that was pretty much setting out my personality in terms of I like to be honest, and I like to write about things that I care about. If I'm passionate about them and then they disappoint, then I'm going to say I'm disappointed. Yeah. If you've made some errors, or if there's something that makes me scratch my head, I'm going to kind of question it. And then sort of roll forward, and then eventually I left that company. We set up our own magazines. Oh my God, almost 16, 17 years ago, I think. It's been a long time. And so we had a Mechanical CAD magazine, an AEC magazine. Then friends of ours forced us to run a show that we didn't want to do, which became Develop 3D, which is a engineering event. And that kind of grew and grew and grew. And then one year, some other friends of ours from Lenovo said, "Oh, why don't you do an architectural show?" And we had a little conversation. I thought, well, I'd like to do one. And they said, "How about doing it in 10 weeks?" I was like, Next Build was kind of rushed through, but it was a bit of a success. It was a small number of people. And the idea is to try and keep it to the folks I talk to are design IT directors, heads of R&D, the people who are involved in research. And, I don't really go to see many companies that use products out of the box without really doing any extra development or plugging in or creating a tech stack to actually deliver a workflow. I mean, that for me is the most interesting thing is the creativity that in firms that are capable of matching point products to make it end from start to end, and trying to make things work. And then you speak to someone like Zaha's and you kind of think, oh my God, every single project they do, they don't have fixed products. It's down to, okay, this is the team we're assembling, and you seem to be strong on CATIA and you're strong on Rhino and May. So that's it for that project. And these guys over here are strong on Rhino and maybe something else, and they're going to use different products. And that's kind of also an eye-opener, that there isn't one workflow for the industry. Everyone does it differently. Yeah. And so, and then this year we kind of threw Next Dev in, and that was another one which was kind of like 10 weeks before. I was even ahhing about it, and we hit the previous year. We had Michael Marks from ex-Katera, one of the founders of Katera, come over and talk. And at this point, he's a investor. He's someone who's interested, but isn't necessarily. He's more interested as an investor. And so we got this kind of like, so you and I might be Mr. He's billionaire Michael Marks. Okay. He's not, and it was just interesting to watch people come up and approach him. People come out to say, "Can you put a good word in?" And, we need some, I've met him twice. I have no say, but I got to know him quite well. We had some kind of interesting conversations, and I started learning more about the VC side of the industry, and I kind of spent a bit more time then that year talking to VCs and understanding what's going on. I've always talked to lots of startups, but now I've kind of entered this zone of, because we tend to cover new firms, because I get excited about their technology, then we put that in the magazine. We have now a bit of a reputation for kind of showing these new firms off. And so that means I get more people coming to me saying, "I've got some new stuff. What do you think?" So Next Dev came out of an influx of people contacting me. And part of it was looking for what's next after Revit. What is going to be the next thing? Is it going to be Forma? We don't know. We don't really know, not enough from Autodesk's point of view. And there are loads of startups. And ever since the open letters came out, there has been a lot of VC activity and development activity with people sensing blood, rightly or wrongly. I mean, products are sticky. And even in the mechanical CAD world, I've seen this with SolidWorks, which have farted around for years trying to kind of get people to move from SolidWorks to CATIA, and they're bringing out all these new technologies that SolidWorks people aren't interested in. And everyone else who's hoping to get into that market is sat around waiting and just quietly developing their products. So even Dassault can't get their customers to move from one to another. Autodesk knows it's going to have a serious problem getting people from Revit to a brand new. And I kind of think that's why, in some ways, from my understanding of how they're going to do it, this is kind of thing at the moment, connecting Revit to this new unified database. So you're translating, but you won't know about it. And then eventually they'll rip the database out of Revit, so it's talking directly to the unified thing. Then Revit really is the front end. And then they can start reworking the features if they so choose. But Autodesk, as usual, might acquire something. So Autodesk has never developed a BIM tool of its own.
Right.
It bought Architectural Desktop.
Right.
It bought Revit. At the moment, it seems like the Revit team aren't necessarily involved with Forma.
Right.
It seems to be very much the space maker dudes. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done, kind of fleshing out this database, which is fundamental to the next generation. But at the moment, Autodesk is trying to keep Revit, its income, its customers' vision, saying this is a product which will get some new features every year, but the reticence to go into the deep guts of it just aren't there, because every time you go into the deep guts, you start breaking it. So we're kind of seeing, I think the biggest one that I know of that's going to go in there is the One Graphic System, which is a kind of like a new graphic subsystem, which they've stuck in all the other products, but it could be like 1 or 2 years still before they get it into Revit. It could be the next year, but that will give people a big boost as well in terms of speed, because graphic, which is what people. I mean, this is the thing with Revit, is I always saw Autodesk desperately trying to get more performance out of it, and then literally someone would get the new version, which was maybe 10 or 15% faster, and then let's start modeling in more detail or just adding more and more to it, which would then kill it. And in the analysis of all of this and looking back, I think we were absolutely insane back in 2010, 2008 to think that BIM was all going to be done in one single model, in a file, in one product. Right. It's just insane. Right. It just is the most stupid thing that I could think that we all fell for, thinking this is the right way to go. And it's only now that we're seeing the files aren't the future. It's databases, and databases will give us that ability to all work from one version without the kind of slowing down that a file or if it does get a lot larger, at least it's on a server somewhere. It's not on your desktop when you're trying to send it to somebody or going into the customers. This is the thing. Going into these customers, seeing that they had all these compressors and encryption things to shunt Revit models around. It was instead of spending a fortune in hardware trying to send big models to one another in different countries or wherever. And then we had COVID, and the greatest thing that COVID ever did for the industry was it reminded everybody that there's a different way of working, and this stuff's been developed for ages. It just, you didn't feel comfortable maybe using it.
Have to,
and it saved a lot. It saved a lot of people's backsides, and it also created some interesting hardware conundrums. In the UK, you couldn't buy a workstation laptop for love nor money come May of the first lockdown. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of AEC magazine. We tend to not bother with the mundane. We tend to try and look at things that are actually moving forward, things that are going to make improvements. So I do these little projects. I was explaining to you before that in the summers, I like to I always write big. I don't write small. So I'll go off and research a topic and then splurge it out in a big article coming out the other end of it. So I've done that with 3D printing. So I went around all the 3D printing companies. This is a couple of years ago, about 5 years ago. And then in 2018, I went round to design IT directors to talk tech stacks. And I learned so much about the kind of world of pain that they're in, with license models changing, technology changing, software not working, one thing updates, and then it breaks everything else, ongoing costs, and then the demands of their board, and then the demands of their users. And then things, it doesn't really help when software companies don't give them the tools to track software usage, and then is more than happy to go in and give them some kind of non-compliance fine, which isn't particularly fair. I mean, it's not as if they're trying to steal software. It's the case of they haven't got the tools to track it, and they're in an organization that's running multiple license types over multiple different countries. They've got to go backwards and forwards between releases of things like Revit because you have to lock in if you're going to work together because of that kind of limitation. These people have to be master jugglers, and I had a new appreciation for that person, whoever it is in a company, to keep everything going. And so from that focus, I think pretty much that's kind of really impacted the way the AEC magazine has looked at technologies, identified things to review, looked at pain points. Obviously, we've been very hot on things like open letters, because I always kind of feel users don't really have a lot of say. Specifically in an Autodesk world, you are locked in. You're using that file format. You're using that software. You've got all that training. Everybody in your company uses it. It's bought in at the board. Okay, you're using it.
Yep.
You're going to use it, and you're not really going to swap out very easily. And because of that, that makes you, it puts you in a problem position because you've got no leverage. And subscription makes it even worse. And before you could say, we're not upgrading, come back when you're doing something that we're interested in. But when subscription's there, you're tied in. That's it. You've got to keep on going. So yeah, those kind of things are obviously become quite passionate, and you'll see that in the magazine. The role of the IT design director, I think, is not respected enough. I've kind of been hanging out with these guys now for quite a while, and the thing that's great about since the open letters and since the thing is with the open letters and then next build and then now next dev is these guys are meeting if they didn't know each other, they're now meeting each other. And it's great to see the connection between these very large architectural firms, mid-sized architectural firms, and now we've got construction firms joining in as well. So if the industry can work together more, not on the federated way that they do it, but just discussing the day-to-day issues that they all might have with a vendor, or they all might have with a piece of software, or that they're all actively discussing who's being offered sweetheart deals at the moment, because sweetheart deals sound great, but they are a ball and chain for some time in the future. So they're all trying to be made aware of trying to avoid some of the slippery slopes.
This episode is made possible with support from Avail. What's one of the most painful aspects of working in Revit today? Well, we all know that as a Revit project grows over time, navigating the information in that project becomes ever more taxing. And when more than one person is working on a project, a new wave of challenges arise. It only gets more difficult throughout the life of a project. Good news, a huge update to Avail Desktop was just released. Version 4.5 introduces several powerful new features designed to improve organizing, searching, and finding information within Avail. New features include channel groups, application mappings, and scope searches. But that's not all. Let's talk about the all-new Project Navigator, a powerful new feature in Avail for Revit 5.1 that extends Revit's native project browser to help navigate the dense information you're forced to endure as your projects grow. For the first time, Avail will connect your active project to your standard library with one unified search box. With Project Navigator, you can easily switch between active projects, see recently viewed Revit elements, search across all Revit project elements, yes, all of them, conveniently search Avail with one click, filter by all the different element types, navigate to sheets and views, legends and schedules, view individual elements contained on sheets and navigate to them, view family types, and more importantly, actually drag and drop them right into your project, view instances of each family type currently being used in the model, and more. To read all about the new features and see a video of them in action, visit getavail.com. There you'll find a features pull-down menu, and you can look at all of the different features, including the new Project Navigator. Once again, that's getavail.com, and look in the bar across the top for that features pull-down menu. Thank you to Avail for supporting this episode of Troxel. It's interesting to me how you, like, looking back, you can piece together you were talking to VC people, you're talking to the developers, and then you've kind of put that together so that everybody is in the same room having these conversations at the conference. And I mean, those were some of the most interesting points from the videos that I was able to watch about the conference, was when you have somebody in an investment firm and they're talking about what they're watching in the industry and how they're watching growth happen, because they're purely interested in this from a financial standpoint, but they're talking about it out loud to the people who actually use the software and the people who are developing the software, and kind of painting the picture of what they're up against, right? Because we do have these incumbents in the industry who they hold so much of the market share, the lion's share of the market share. And they're basically saying, like, they're still acquiring users. They're still growing. There's even with the dearth of development that's going on. And so you start to see where the opportunities are, right? And obviously the people developing software alongside or in lieu of, features that maybe don't exist yet, looking for they see those opportunities, but it's also showing that, like, it's actually a hard road to toe. There's going to be a lot of competition in this space. There's going to be a large slog to get there, because it's like you said, Dassault can't even get their customers to move to a different piece of software that they offer themselves, right? And let alone, look how many firms are still using AutoCAD, or LT even, to smaller firms, but they're still using AutoCAD to deliver their projects, right? And they haven't even moved to Revit, that's been out for 20 plus years. So
this is the thing that kind of freaks me out, is the business side. It's as if software companies don't realize their business motives are so absolutely obvious to the rest of us that they can somehow spin them as being beneficial to customers. Autodesk, for instance, said it would never force customers to go from perpetual to subscription. It did. It basically did. But it gave them a very nice reward for doing it, but even they got bored of waiting for that. And so that was kind of those kind of things. Never say never. And the reality is that once Autodesk did it, then every other software company that's competing with Autodesk saw the revenue bump and has gone, all right, okay, they've done it. We've got shareholders. We have to do the same thing. So then you see subscriptions starting to appear. Then you start seeing named user licenses start to appear. You start seeing the end of network licenses. Suddenly, it's not just one company that's decided to squeeze the lemon harder. It's the whole industry that's squeezing the lemon harder. And these are the same people, because it's a tech stack of stuff to be squeezed on. And I feel their pain. And software companies have less accountability because of software subscription, because you have to buy it to use it. So you have to keep paying. There's no, how do I tell you what I want and I will pay for what I want? I don't like paying for stuff I don't want. And that's currently what people are doing, is paying for stuff they don't want. Adobe, another company that kind of went through, a lot of the firms I'm talking to in London are trying to get rid of their creative suites because of the cost per individual so high. So they're going to go to Serif, the Serif company, and they're saving some money that way. And it's people are throwing out brand names now to try and save money. I've had some people tell me that Autodesk are possibly 60 to 70% of their entire IT spend. So that doesn't really leave a lot in a company to buy other stuff, which then limits other companies coming into the market, not to compete with something like Revit, but to offer a nice application. So like, I'm using this, but it's expensive. So NVIDIA Omniverse, for instance, that's like another $4,000 or $5,000 per user. That's like it's you can't really have that throughout your entire company unless you can justify it by having huge fees. So there is a limit to how much money people have got. I kind of get tired of people keep quoting, "Oh, this industry spends less than fishing." It's like, well, the companies I'm going to see are spending a shitload of money, and they are always increasing that budget. And if you look at the entire construction industry, you have all the subs and the contractors who are lucky to have a computer, or they might have a copy of LT running on something. They don't spend a lot of money on IT. I get it. Maybe they swamp out the rest of the market, but the kind of design firms I'm talking to are spending a lot of money on subscriptions to software and expensive workstations, and now expensive servers, and there's costs involved. These people are. When I go to a mechanical CAD company that's doing design, they have one really good workstation with a decent graphics card in it. If they're really good at product design, they might have a VR headset. Maybe it's a 10 grand one, but they don't really have this other plethora of other software applications that they use, which is what happens in design, Yeah. And I always try and explain to people the differences that in the user case is a triangle. The bottom end of the triangle is people who make rectangles, and they are the average building. And then the people in the top 25% of that pyramid all start their projects in Rhino Grasshopper. They care about the geometry more than they care about anything else. Revit and other products are merely a documentation tool of their crazy geometry. A friend of mine who worked at Foster & Partners said, we have to sell experiences to clients. When we sell them the experience, we're not worried where the toilets are in the building. We're not worried where the piping is. That's a problem for us to solve later. We need to create design that so captivates this customer that they want to sign up and buy it. And when they want to sign up and buy it, then we'll worry about the details. But it's geometry first.
Right.
And so I kind of split the market into geometry first architects and then people who make rectangles. And so I'm guessing I'm kind of specifically aiming at that top 25%, or the aspirational firms that want to move into that kind of, want to compete. And they might have a lot of Rhino, or wish for Rhino geometry, Rhino Grasshopper geometry. So what I started off doing was trying to say, well, what is going to be if I talked to a lot of these guys and I said, look, if you're really fed up with Revit, then there's ArchiCAD. At least they've redeveloping the underside of it, the architecture of it over time. It does multi-threaded processes. They've got some kind of cloud installation. They've got some new stuff. So there is an underlying reworking of ArchiCAD underneath, which I'm not really seeing so much so in Revit. And they just said they didn't want to swap one BIM tool to another BIM tool because they were fundamentally questioning BIM as the computer science is today. Because if you think about it, all the BIM, nothing's different. I mean, if you spend any time talking to Jonathan Ingram, Sonata, back in the day in the 80s, the logic of BIM where you have a wall, windows and doors go into walls, floors should attach to walls, ceilings attached to all this stuff. This logic hasn't changed since the 80s.
Right.
And it's almost the same in the mechanical CAD space. Well, you can look at that and say, oh, they're much more advanced than this. They're not, because Parasolid, which is the most populous solid modeling kernel, hasn't fundamentally changed for 40 years. And so the product that came in and kicked PTC's backside was SolidWorks. SolidWorks uses a Parasolid kernel. So, okay, that dominates the market. Then John Hirschstick, who's the guy behind it, then thought, I'll put SolidWorks on the cloud, basically is the concept. So he did Onshape, which is Parasolid, but on the cloud. So it can't actually do anything different because it's limited by the fundamental underlying technology that was decided decades ago. I think this is the issue now is, as I'm looking at BIM 2.0, next generation BIM, are we seriously going to take Revit as it is and just shove it on the cloud? Or are we going to say, you know what, computer science has changed? I know that there's a lot of work that's gone into data, but actually, is this the right way to work? Is this really the right way to work? I mean, you won the architects over, but you didn't really win over MEP very easily. Structures, they've still got their own tools, and it's kind of like another thing that they use. So, and sticking everything in one file was dumb. So let's rethink what it should be. And people have accused me of saying we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. The logic might be right for most of it, but there has to be a rethinking of how you go about doing this and making it easier. Because, all old products are just an actual bunch of wires. They're just a mess. It happens over time. That's why products eventually have new generations, because you have to try and start from scratch to clean out the mess, to have some clean code. And then please have some new ideas while you're at it. And I was looking at things like Snapstreak, thinking, I talked to Altaf in 2018, 2019. He showed me his sketchy stuff. I mean, this was in a white space, no top, no bottom, no grid, just lines and some obtuse angle that he was playing with. It was very interesting for parametrics. The parametrics was interesting. And I said, oh yeah, well, yeah, come back to me when it's kind of you're building it. And then the more I talked to him, the more I realized this guy is incredibly bright, very serious. He got some money. He started developing. I was very surprised when I saw the next time round. Then he got WeWork to help him. I've seen obviously V2's come out now. I mean, and he's now got something like $20 million in the bank, and he's got 5 years runway with 40 developers to go at it. And in 5 years' time, he's going to. If you look at, he's going to put Revit on the cloud. How different is it going to be in my kind of ways and wishes of it actually being beyond what we've had before? I don't know, but that was what I was thinking was going to be the contender. Probably Autodesk would buy it, maybe Nemetschek would buy it. Someone's going to buy it, but he's got in 5 years' time. The velocity that they're producing stuff. There's nothing quite like Snapstreak's development at the moment, but it is BIM on the cloud, as you know and love. It has families. It's RBTs is the core of it, and a file format can be so limiting because there's a limit to what you can store in it, because the very definition is the thing you're copying rather than going beyond it. And if you look at Autodesk, when they developed Inventor, they were given carte blanche. They were allowed to forget that they ever created AutoCAD. And Inventor didn't do DWG very well for most of its early life, because they had to free themselves of the past to try and create something new. So I'm hoping that we're going to see some new stuff from other developers. And then I kind of saw the swap stuff, which kind of blew my mind. Suddenly I've gone from, this kind of cloud stuff's kind of interesting, to, oh my God, AI is going to decimate documentation as a workflow. And it might actually also impact some very basic modeling detailing. And at that point, then I had to completely re-scramble my brain as to thinking what the future of this industry is going to be, because I honestly believe that even though BIM tools should have automatic 2D drafting, that was the thing they were sold on, people don't like the automatic output. And so they stick it in AutoCAD and they break it. I think that AI, with the stuff I've seen lately, you're going to be able to upload a model from anything and it will produce 2D drawings of all floors, of all new elements. And there might be some bits you don't like. There might be some bits that you can retrain it so it'll do it the way you want it. But I just don't see the future architects spending a whole load of time and money in developing drawings in the next 5 to 10 years.
I hope so.
It's going to be amazing.
That's not what we should be competing on. We shouldn't be competing on that. I firmly believe that's not our best value. It is what we all do. And we obviously compete on it in a capitalism sense, but it isn't where our value and our time should really be spent. And it is an enormous time suck. I mean, it's like you said, as soon as the computer got faster, we just drew more detail and we filled the computer back up again. And that isn't, it was interesting to think 10 years ago,
or let's say 2008, your timeline when Revit, was really starting to gain a foothold,
Mm-hmm.
when firms were actually switching from AutoCAD to doing
Yep.
their projects in Revit. And to think of what's happened since then with, it was Moore's law strictly back then, right? And so it was like, well, if, it might be slow today, but next year it's going to be faster. And the year after that, it's going to be faster. And so everybody just had this expectation that was going to keep happening, except that it didn't. And then GPUs came along and kind of it breathed new life into that way of thinking, right? Which is we can cram more into
Revit
there.
hardly used the GPUs. And so
I know.
people were going out there and buying loads and loads of big graphics cards. They were like going, stop. It's all about the CPU. Buy the fastest CPU you could ever. And then SSDs were the biggest boost you could get. And, it was just for the hardware guys that, advertised with us. They were like banging their heads against the wall for about 5 years and give us something to hook into so we can accelerate this thing. And it just wasn't there. And the interesting thing is the stuff that's being developed now is nearly all in the cloud. So you don't buy a graphics card to make it faster. What happens to make it faster when it slows down? I have no idea. But and I'm a big fan of having local desktop power. I think it's important to be able to walk away and do your own work off grid and then somehow reintroduce it. But that technically computational science is very hard. If you've got lots of people, it could be slightly easier than some guy who was the SketchUp guy coming along halfway through the detailed design phase saying, hey, I've made some changes to the SketchUp model. How can we incorporate this in Revit? And then all the design managers are there ready to beat him up and work out what it is that he's changed so they can incorporate it. So, I'm just looking forward to the end of some of these historic pain points that we're at. I think people are fed up of doing it. They just do it. But I do worry about the job situation because how many people are employed in producing drawings? Just producing drawings as opposed to doing the design. I think that whatever anyone says, once you have automated drawings, reliable automated drawings, then you're going to see a dynamic change in firm structure, payment structures, and you might have more people, get to be an architect, which would be fantastic. There is a shortage of people coming into the industry. I completely buy into the short-term gain, no real pain, but I'm just kind of thinking long-term here, where once it gets good at modeling, then what? And you'll just, I was watching Star Trek the other day, and I used to take it for granted that they were talking to the computer all the time. And, and that is actually here now. People can talk to their computers and you can get stuff done. But obviously it's not fully cognizant of what we're actually trying to do. But this is coming. Your input to the computer is going to be speaking, input with a mouse or whatever still. It's going to be images. It's going to be music. God knows what it will be that will just generate this. So I kind of feel that there's a change in so many different, the interface of the computer. The computer itself, is it on your desktop or is it in the cloud? Is it a GPU? Is it a CPU? I mean, these are all, are you just seeing a screen that's a computer somewhere, 1,000 miles away? All these things are changing. And then there's the software, which the laziest thing is what's happening in the MCAD space is a lot of people have taken their code and they've just shoved it on a cloud instance. And that's what you get. So you're still running the old code, but it's running, it hasn't been optimized necessarily for the cloud. I think with Autodesk and Forma, we obviously know they are starting from scratch and they're actually not going to throw the old code up. They have definitely bigger plans for it. And for people like Nemetschek, it's a concern because nearly all of their software is desktop based. The stuff they're doing to ArchiCAD is interesting, where you can choose, you can run some of the processing on the cloud, or you can run it locally. And I'm fascinated to learn a little bit more about their flexible architecture, because that's what I'd want. I'd want to be able to choose, because you're still paying money to run it on a fast someone else's computer as opposed to your own.
Right.
And so yeah, there's that. Then AI, everyone immediately jumps to ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion, and that's such a immediate low bar to set yourself when you're talking about AI in this industry, because all buildings are recipes, all building codes are variables. The ease with which if someone sat down and put all that stuff into an AI, just to check your models, to check your designs against, is not far off. And that could happen in real time. There's no reason why you have to submit this model. It could be there in the background all the time. And then also put drawings are something you get on demand. They're not things that are created in a set phase. They're always there until, I need to submit my drawings. No one's doing anything for planning. Good grief. So what's the point of doing all this? You can still speed up and use Swap AI and, hey, in 40 minutes, I've got a design, I've got all the drawings, and then you submit it for planning, and that still could take 3-4 months before anyone looks at it or they actually understand what they're looking at. So you have to speed up all parts of the industry if you want to get real acceleration. But I kind of, after spending a lot of time with the AI guys, there's a lot of concern about IP. I think Martha wrote something in building design, or Martha from Foster Partners wrote something. She really is quite concerned about theft of design and knowledge. And it's not just competitors, but there are real big issues with software companies, not just having all your data on their servers. And I'd lined up an article, which I won't go into, but I'm about to look into this, where according to the EULAs, when you're storing your data on people's servers, on your software provider servers, how much insight do they have to that knowledge? And because you're using not just their point solution to create the design, you're also using their software their design distribution sign-off, maybe ERP, maybe bidding software. They have actual insight into your entire business, who you work with, how well you worked with them, the number of revisions that were made on every single project. They know the design information. It's a incredibly powerful place to be. And the question is, can these people be trusted to keep their fingers not just off your designs, but off your network, your private network? And I think that's a concern. I do think they obviously want to run AI to train, to be better, to help people. And there's a limit, but I feel there should be a limit to what that is. And I get a feeling from a lot of these larger practices, they don't really want their design data on a large software developer's private or public cloud solution, because they just don't quite know what's going to happen to their information. And would you be happy to know that your competitor, your software is being, your process is being shared with your competitor, or your design now? Yeah. So there's issues.
And you saw recently, like Zoom changed their EULA there and talked about using anything in those meetings to train AI. Then they walked it back. It was probably a little bit too late for many of their customers at that point. But then we've seen the same thing with Adobe. I've seen people posting, here's how you go in and tell it to opt out of training because you're opted in by default for Firefly and generative.
That should be made illegal. It should be off by default. I've got a friend who's an MIT graduate who teaches high school kids that kind of like that last year of maths, private schooling, all on Zoom. And he just went, I'm gone. There is no way on earth they're having access to my tutorials, and it's my IP. I think we're having maybe a silly moment where we think we can do this. And in Europe, I think there'll be laws against it. I'm pretty sure they're quite hot on that. I mean, I know that they're looking into this whole issue, having software vendors having such a huge insight into business processes, as opposed to you going to a company saying, analyze my business processes to improve my company. No, it's like, we're keeping a tab on everyone. If you've got such a powerful position in the software tools market, then there is reason to be concerned.
Sure.
So I'd like everyone to sort of think about their cloud services a little bit more than they do at the moment. And this is the other problem at the moment that I'm seeing, is sweetheart deals where it's easy in, low cost in, but it's going to be ratcheted up. And once you're in there, it's going to be really hard to get out. Not saying the services that you get aren't bad, but they know it's kind of like a drug.
Right.
And nobody should really be getting a sweetheart deal. It should be, this is the cost. This is absolutely the cost, and you need to know about it. Not have it sneak up behind you and wallop either not you, but your replacement as a design IT director in 3 or 4 years' time.
This episode is made possible with support from Confluence. If you've been listening to the Troxel podcast, you've heard of our next sponsor for this episode, Confluence. But we have something new to announce. Confluence is now more than invite-only live events. It's now also a podcast. And it's very cool, if I do say so myself, because it's a joint collaboration between me here at Troxel and Randall Stevens of Avail, who is the creator of Confluence, as well as having been on this podcast a couple of times talking about the AEC tech industry that we all love. So who's the show for? Well, have you ever written software? Or wondered why the software you use works the way it does? Or want to find out how the people who make the software in our industry do their work? Then this is the show for you. I like to describe the Confluence podcast as the director's commentary track for AEC industry software, because in each episode, we go behind the scenes of AEC software development and talk directly with the developer to dissect a feature and their workflows and get an inside view of how and why they made the decisions they did while creating the software you use. Randall describes it as the AEC industry software version of the How I Built This podcast, which we are both huge fans of. Confluence is a visual show in which our guests show their work. We think you're really going to like it, and we already have a few episodes out for you to watch. You can find it on YouTube and Spotify right now. Just search for Confluence Podcast on those platforms, or click the direct links I've put in the show notes for this episode. Go check it out, and please subscribe. No, really, just go check it out and subscribe right now. This episode will still be here when you get back. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. Well, you've talked about kind of the next wave, and I want to, maybe we can shift into the next dev and next build conference and kind of the convergence of enough energy that you have coined the BIM 2.0 term, not on your own, but you're using that to kind of talk about the next wave. And one of the big pieces of that is this data framework, this kind of standards body that's come together with European firms. And then I think Greg is brought it to the LFRT as well, and in the US, and kind of talking about setting up a data framework that serves AEC kind of in a similar analogy of the way that USD and these large companies have gotten together on the visual effects and the gaming side to kind of make these definitions at an industry level that then software providers deliver on, right? And that's kind of the idea here, is like, here's a wish list, and it's not like specific tools, it's data framework, it's how do we get data through the entire pipeline. I'd love it if you could just kind of get into Aaron's talk and how that all came together. And then, because there is also this other stuff that's actually people producing apps that maybe started before this framework came out,
And there's a bit of a mismatch there already, even though it's like early days for a lot of them, right? And so it's
It's
tough
complicated.
position.
It definitely is.
It's really complicated. Yeah.
So I think the thing that we have to realize, the fundamental thing that everyone has to realize, is that files are going to go away. And the way that you do an RVT file or a DWG file, they will probably be some kind of output as a last resort in the future, because as we move to cloud, then we have a live database. So whoever owns it or whatever system it is, whoever you're subscribing to, the database has so many more advantages than file. And files are, I think Andrew Adignos described as dead things walking, and it's true. They are going to go. And as we move towards this BIM 2.0, and I kind of wanted to, with BIM 2.0, my aim was really just to try and explain to people that there is a change happening. Even though I've spoken to a lot of people who are on Revit now, and they just saying, Revit isn't dead or whatever is going on. And I have to try and explain to them that actually there is no new generation of Revit. So what happens to software that doesn't have a next generation? What happens to your knowledge with that next? There is a finite point. It might not be now. It might not be 5 years. It could be 10 years away. But at some point, Autodesk is going to get bored with trying to support 50 users who don't want to move, or whatever the number is they decide. So it is going on. It will have some updates, but it's not, from what I can tell, it'll never have a significant rewriting, or they're not going to go into the guts of it, because it just creates quality issues. So if we're going to have BIM 2.0, if we're going to move, then this is the kind of thing that happened with the Open Letter group. The first part of this was the Open Letter group getting very fed up, asking Autodesk for features, and then combing through the future feature lists that they'd planned, and not really seeing much of what they'd asked for. And then they kind of realized that these were Revit fanboys, and they kind of got to the point saying, there's no point asking Autodesk for anymore, because we know that they're not going to do it. So what do we do? So they started talking to everybody and stuff. But in a conversation I had with a smaller group of them, they were like saying, well, maybe we just need to tell the industry as a whole what it is. And it's not like they're architects. They can't tell people what software they want, but they can tell them what kind of things they want the next generation to be able to do. And this conversation was picked up by the Open Letter group in the UK, and they started a work group. So they've been working on this for over a year, of what kind of capabilities would we like to see? What kind of problems do we have in our day-to-day work that's not being addressed by anybody? And so that work was started, and you had Aaron from AHMM and Andy from Grimshaw's, who were kind of like leading the kind of thought on that. And so while they were working away on that, Greg, I think I met Greg in a bar with Bob McNeil, as all good things start. So my friendships with Greg started somewhere in Sweden with Greg Schleusner, and we were talking about getting rid of 2D drawings. That was our conversation, and he was actively trying to find a solution to this problem. And could it be BricsCAD? Is this someone else who's actively actually trying to do something to solve this problem? And so that started with a conversation about drawings. And then obviously the discussion in the industry was about next generation. And Greg started talking to me about his ideas for a database that was owned by the AEC industry, not owned by a vendor. Because so if you remember back in the days of AutoCAD, we all had DWG. DWG was the lingua franca of design, and literally every other CAD package had to import or export DWG, normally pretty badly. And I remember spending a lot of time with Bentley Systems, and they ended up to actually properly support DWG stock complaints from their users. They had to go through AutoCAD and find all of the element types that had to be translated into things that didn't exist in the definition of MicroStation schema and add them into MicroStation. So that there was a really good map between AutoCAD entities and MicroStation entities. And I was like, oh my God, this is the way you solve interoperability, by literally making sure you've got a map-to-map feature set. And so, yeah, a lot of work from Bentley, from Keith Bentley on iModel, and talk to him about schemas. So there are people who have been working to try and think of a bigger thing. But the one thing that mustn't happen with BIM Level 2 is to be DWG'd or RVT'd again. We don't want to go into a new generation and immediately have interoperability problems. We need to have clarity. Data needs to flow between all the people in a project like water. It shouldn't, I go see companies that have professional data wranglers. They sit there and their job is to, Ted wants this in DGN, and these guys want an RVT file, and these guys want an IFC, but they only want the kind of the fire doors. So he's there, and he's like trying to shuffle out this stuff. This happens in so many companies because they're playing, Tower of Babel. So the discussion with Greg, and his idea was to try and create a open format that uses open standards, that isn't owned by anybody, that can sit in the cloud and be a reservoir or a data lake for project information. And not to be something where you just fire and forget, but the information that you create is information that you still own in the data lake. But the idea would be, a lot of this comes from maybe Speckle and also IFC.js and this kind of stuff, where you have these little server codes running on every single machine. You atomize your model to every single element, and you're sending individual elements to the data lake. So every time you create a door, the door is then sent up into the data lake. You still have an RVT version of it, but there'll be a data lake version which we formatted maybe in IFC or something else. I don't know. But the idea being that you still create and broadcast the things you create, but it doesn't mean that people can change your designs. So structural engineers and everyone else can actually then subscribe to your components. And so every time when they subscribe, they can import the ISCs of them as individual components. If there are any changes or updates, they get notified. They get that information coming through. And so you end up with this kind of arbitrage, this kind of exchange system where the data lake is live and everybody is still in control of their own data, yet it's shared. So at the moment, you got idiots saying, you got a guy saying, no, I need an IFC of this work package. And then someone just goes, oh yeah, I can do that, IFC out. And then you got the whole, everything. Oh, there you go. That's what you asked for. This is so stupid. We can get past this. So Greg was working on this idea of this kind of data lake. And then within his kind of journey, he's kind of identified, steps within sort of data creation to try and capture the knowledge that went with that data, and to try and also capture the history of that information. So you've got all types of capabilities within it. So rolling forward, now this is kind of where it gets a bit confusing, because people are looking at things like Speckle, and they're saying this is kind of what Speckle does. What? Speckle is predominantly about files. It's predominantly about me connecting you with my files. So it's like a point-to-point plumbing system between things. It's not this kind of communal data lake that just sits there and then has all sorts of knowledge information added to the elements. But the thing that Speckle's great as is it'll get you the geometry, the IFC information from A to B. And I know that Greg's had some conversations with Dimitri and Matteo about what it is, but I just don't think that there's there's necessarily an understanding about what Greg is doing and why it's different to what they're doing. And the other thing is that IFC is obviously the start point for this, but it's got limitations and it's not brilliant, but it's start point. And then the idea from that is that Greg's Susan is highly involved in building smart, so he can help influence his ideas from the idea of he's calling it strange matter, because when we spoke to him, he kind of came up with lots of 3-name acronyms, and I was like, oh, I'm so done with 3-name acronyms. We've got to have something else. So it's strange matter it is. And there's this extra level of information that's beyond BIM, it's more practice centric, it's knowledge centric, it's AI, it's whatever's, your secret sources, but you can have, you can share more information than IFC, which is the current limitation. Now, jumping aside and talking about USD is fundamentally geometry. It's geometry with lighting and textures. It's not a standard, number one. It's owned by Pixar, so it's not like an international ISO standard. They did open it in terms of publishing it in 2016, but since then they haven't necessarily been too willing in expanding it. The only expansion I've read about was when they took USD and they did a USD Z or an X with Apple for some of their kind of immersive VR X tests. But then you got people like Omniverse and NVIDIA who were scraping the RVT, turning it into USD, scraping some more from the RVT and adding that into the USD, which wasn't standard. It was still a standard USD, and you could open it and you could see the geometry and you could see the textures and you could get the lighting. But the extra stuff, the extra BIM stuff that NVIDIA had scraped and stored wasn't in a open area. No one understood that data because it was theirs. So they were extending it secretly, but not for their benefit and for Omniverse's benefit. And the idea is that if we are going to expand USD for this industry's benefit, then everyone needs to be on board. And the Alliance for Open USD is predominantly about everybody agreeing what things that could be added into USD from various different, not just architecture, but other areas. What are Pixar willing to allow it to expand to? Because the last thing they want is it to bloat. So there's going to be a subset of other stuff added, and then there might be sort of an AEC variant afterwards. But the idea is to try and drive it to becoming an ISO standard, I believe. But this is, I think NVIDIA told me once they wanted to take IFC and USD and slam them together and make a new open format. And I was like, if you have two open formats together, you do not get a third new open format. You just get you just get another kind of hybrid that's your own. So this is the way that the industry can do that. So you might see you might see some subset of IFC ending up within the actual USD, and then there'll be a little bit more outwards. But ultimately, it's still a file. We've still got this problem. It's still a bloody file, and that means that it's still got a limitation. So there needs to be an implementation of USD, which is a schema. It's a structure. It's basically a wrapper around data. There needs to be a cloud-based data lake version of it. Now, again, that will still be a subset of data because everyone's trying to design by committee. Everyone's got to agree with it. It'll be better than USD. It might be better than IFC, but it will still be a incomplete version of everything that's added into a CAD system. The reason we had DWG, the reason we had RBT, while we might I'm slacking these proprietary file formats off. You have to have a proprietary format, otherwise you can never develop your software to do more. You've got to be in control of your destiny. And so Autodesk is going to have its own unified data environment. that is not going to be published. That is not going to be open. That is going to be sat on their database, on their servers. But if you want your data out, then you've got these exchange servers where you request certain elements, certain geometry, and you can get it out in whatever file you want. Files are going to be this kind of like subset where you kind of think, oh, right, I just need to get that information out to stick it into my thing. It's not going to, or you might get it out through an API. You might have you might load a Forge element that has a Revit model. You select the elements that you want, and then you just press a button and somehow it connects to another bit of software that you own. That means that's what you get sent. You don't even see it. And I do believe that Autodesk is fairly sincere about a new open front in terms of next generation technology. It's in their favor. It's just at the moment, I think the way that they're going to be spinning it is that they're going to be charging for individual services. So if you want to exchange and get a file out, that'll come as a micro cost. So everyone's going to end up with a kind of a cloud wallet just to do some things, maybe with some data that's not theirs, but with someone else's. The problem comes when companies need to grow and they need more revenue, and $4 billion a year isn't enough, and you need more. So therefore, you change the licensing model. I was talking to a developer who said that one software company was now charging developers per API call. And so to do a transaction, it might be 40 API calls. But if the server's down or if there's some traffic or whatever, it could be 90 API calls. So as a developer, you don't know each transaction exactly how much you're going to get charged by the software developer. I hope that doesn't become common, but there are going to be some bumps in the road as we move towards this kind of cloud infrastructure with let's change the licensing models to try and make more money because we've got to grow because we have shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, that to one of the points that was in that panel discussion that I watched on your website was, I don't know if it was Aaron or if it was Andy from Grimshaw who talked about just the business model of who your customers are and where the feedback comes from has completely shifted just to shareholders. It's no longer the users of said software in said industry. It's delivering a return on investment for shareholders. And when that's the driving force, all bets are off, right? As far as like what happens next, because your incentives to buy software are now misaligned with their incentives to develop that software.
Yes. And it's painful. And, you know, a lot of these people, I remember the first time I spoke to Jens from Big, I knew he was a massive Revit fanboy. So I was like, okay, I didn't really know if he was just like ringing me up to keep the tires or whatever. And we just had a discussion. And this guy absolutely loved Revit. He was a religion. There was some of these people that kind of get religious by the software. It was a religion. And then the more he stepped up and the more that he was doing big, the more his software of choice was causing him problems, or the company that owned it, or and for him, he was just deeply frustrated because, you know, he wanted to fly and the software wasn't flying. It was, if anything, I was seeing these guys, they were all adding up how much money they spent in workaround software. So for the longest time, PDF was crap from Revit. So they were all buying stuff that was doing that element of it. And when they were asked by Autodesk what features they wanted, which is great, they kind of was sat down and said, listen, we'd sooner not ask Autodesk for things that we've got workarounds for because it's sorted. There are things that we don't have workarounds for that we need sorting. But when Autodesk then would go and ask the grey and wash to the bottom of the triangle what they wanted, they all want the things that were obvious that they hadn't paid money for to get the workarounds. And so you kind of ended up with this, you know, someone at Autodesk years ago when they only had AutoCAD said to me, hey, the great news is you sold like 1 million copies of AutoCAD. Hey, the bad news is you've got 1 million customers of AutoCAD asking for features. And it is true. I mean, to have a software company and be successful, is a double-edged sword.
Right.
And you have to put the resources in to try and keep everyone happy. And every year you used to proffer up some features in the hope that people would upgrade. And some years they didn't. And on average, it was every 3 years they upgraded. And there were some customers that never upgraded. So I try and see it from all sides, but I'm always going to err on the side of customers who are paying for it. And then this kind of like going back to this big data thing is we have to free ourselves and free the data. We have to be able to interface and connect together better. It would be much better if the files and the data and your IP was not owned by a software company and was in fact under your control. And so I think that there is going to be, he's got 39 firms are now backing his plan. He's done a lot of development work. He's got some money. They're all subbing money together. My concern is that it's all US firms. And every time the Gregs come over for next build, I've run this thing which I comedically called Fight Club. And it was to get the people who kind of I knew were on the same wavelength as Greg Schriesner together, so that he can tell them a little bit more about what he was working and thinking about than the stuff he could really say on the stage. And that would normally descend into a bit of a bun fight. It actually did turn into a fight where people were arguing amongst themselves as to, what they wanted to see or, if this was even valid. And we ran it again just after next dev. And that really turned into an absolute screaming argument, which was wow. Healthy and interesting because everyone's got a different perspective. But the reality,
that's my concern with that kind of a situation as well. And I mean, this is something that I don't think firms. It's hard to say. I watch those presentations and I see this list, and it's really well delivered, and it's really thought out, and it's really structured. And then there is the reality of developing software. And if the firms are the ones deciding what the software is going to be, who's going to be the decider? I mean, you can't have everybody being the decider. I think that's going to prove to be a very difficult challenge, which is like defining what the features and the way that you build the tools to actually deliver on those features.
So on that note, so up to this point, pretty much everyone that Autodesk compared from 25 architects plus some in the UK, some in Australia. That was the first letter. Then very few American firms signed up to that. It was a lot of Dutch people, a lot of South Africans, some Japanese. And then the next letter came out from the Nordics. So that was kind of like, obviously quite a few big companies signed up to that. But while the original letter was being digested by Autodesk, these other signature architects, of about 11 of them, didn't want to sign this letter because they thought it was too full frontal. So they went behind and they started talking to Autodesk kind of secretly around the back saying, look, we didn't do the open letter, talk to us. Well, they got treated exactly the same over the next 3 years. And he's got no benefit out of it whatsoever. And obviously they talk to each other because they're all like, signature architects and stuff. So it was very, very interesting to watch how this transpired. And the thing that all of that discussion about what they need, what they want, was framed in a Revit framework. And once you have that Revit framework, it really limits to you as to what it is that you're going to get and what it is that it's capable of and everything. So by stepping out, I think the open letter group and sitting down, especially Aaron, sat out and started saying, there's no point in writing a spec for a CAD system. There's no spec in saying what Revit needs to be added onto. Let's create a feature set and give it to the entire industry, because Autodesk obviously have got their hands full because they're doing Revit and trying to keep that alive while they do Forma. And Forma nothing was coming out of Forma at the time. And what we actually did get was really one of the products that was kind of like just been reworked. It's the database underneath it that's the real big work. So let's step back and let's just tell everybody. I mean, these guys had seen Dassault Systems, Nemetschek, Hexagon, Trimble. Anyone who had an interest in maybe trying to get into Revit's shoes was talking to these people who complained to try and find out. Some of them were trying to sell them the software they already had, when really they should have been going in and saying, what is it that you want? And so this feature list benefited from not having the Revit framework around it anymore, because suddenly you start thinking about, it's about like throwing away RVT, throwing away DWG as a software developer. You're unconstrained once more. You don't have to reverse engineer this into something else or into something old. You can start talking about it. And I think I knew Aaron was working on it. And because of my ridiculous timescales, I knew I threw him in the toilet, because he didn't have long. He worked for weeks on that, trying to get the text ready. And then more people wanted to see it. And so it was like distributing it around and getting feedback. And he gave I think it was the best presentation I've ever seen. And I only sat in awe, because it's one thing when someone gives a great presentation. It's another thing when the pauses and the gaps in the way he delivered it also meant something. And I'm just like thinking, Oh my God, he's actually speaking with space. This is incredible. So, he wasn't just reading off the slides. It was it from was so well communicated, and it was digestible. It was like the vocabulary was totally digestible by everybody in the room, everybody who's watched that. And it came across as written prose. Like there were no mistakes in it. Unbelievable. At all. It was incredible. And the thing is, so since then we've had something like 1,500 people sign up to watch it. And we've got pretty much everyone in Vectorworks. I've got a list of Autodesk is the size of my arm. I've got Graphisoft strategy guys. I've got Dassault Systems. I've also got loads of mergers and acquisitions people watching it as well. It's kind of like, this is a different kind of people who are watching dev. And it's not, the thing that I wanted to do was these design directors know their stuff, and they know what the pain points are. And I just thought, well, I'm fed up of seeing 25 different conceptual design tools come out. And all of them, I didn't even know we had such a big problem with massing. Why are there 25 products that all do roughly the same? It doesn't make any sense. What a waste of money. If the VC guys, the developers, can be presented with an array of options of all the pain points we've got, all the new areas that we're faced with, like, sustainability and CO2 stuff, maybe some of that money will get spread a bit thinner, and we'll start seeing a proper range of tools, not just for this next 5 years. All you're going to see is conceptual design tools. Wow. Oh, here's another one. Here's another one. I just stopped reviewing them in the end because it just didn't make any sense. The ones that are around now and surviving probably have a life, but for 5 years, it was bonkers what we were getting at. So Aaron gave this talk. It was fantastic. It was superbly received, and it was food for thought. So the people in the room, that caused a massive discussion afterwards. The people from NVIDIA weren't particularly happy because it wasn't USD. They're talking about this other framework. But you have to understand that USD is not, it's a transactional format. It's not going to be this new, it'll never be this new standard for people like Greg Schleusner and the NFRT. They're aspiring to have something that's a bit more beyond just data in the cloud, just geometry in the cloud, and so that became the kind of core. Aaron kept saying to me, I was giving him 30 minutes, and then a week later say it's going to be maybe 40. And I gave the night before, he said it's kind of more of an hour. Because we'd all been drinking, I thought he was joking. I was like, ha, 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 ha. And then Andy went, no. He really means it's going to be an hour. I'll be with it. So we ended up with a very, very compressed post discussion but I knew that was like gold. That was the thing that was going to get everyone talking. And immediately after that, the next few days, the open guys are being contacted by large construction firms and structural firms. So there are going to be other names that are going to be added to it. And then hopefully next year we can get a similar thing from a construction perspective, not just an architectural design perspective, but because they too need to buy into the idea of having this data layer, because again, it needs to benefit everybody. And so, but construction's in a different world. So literally all the new stuff for construction, all the AI stuff for construction is nearly about management of site materials, timelines. Right. It's not about design tools. They're not getting the love in that respect, or the startups. They had a whole load of money for 3 or 4 years was piling into construction, and they ended up getting, tools to get documents on iPads on construction sites, or Alice Labs was one, and then Slate AI. But it's just not the same level of kind of development that I'm seeing for design. There are at least 6 or 7 Revit competitors in development at the moment. You haven't seen them all yet. Some are going to, you're not going to see until maybe next year or the year after. So that game isn't over, but that has to feed into general construction. And I was having a conversation yesterday with not Speckle, but Sparkle in Norway, Magnus. And we were just talking about how the other thing that was the whole idea about having a single building model in a single file failed so spectacularly that we ended up with a architectural BIM model, a structural BIM model, an MEP BIM model. We have construction quantities BIM model. It's we've replicated the work. We've created more. We've actually created a worse scenario. And on top of that, if the architects were never accurate in 2D drawings or didn't have good quality in-house, when you take that to 3D, it just really falls out of the edges. I always remember the first time an architectural practice asked me if I knew a way to erase the dimension on the Revit drawing, so they could just write it in rather than actually change the model. And I was like, this isn't good. And then it wasn't that many years ago, I went to a company that had the British kite mark for BIM, and they had modeled a multi-story apartment block. The only person in that whole large firm that had 200 seats that actually saw all of the different levels was the guy in 3D Studio Max, because they'd modeled every single floor separately in Revit. They actually didn't. And I was like, well, this is, how can you do any clash detection or anything when everything's just like you've broken it down to the point of why bother? So
you'd be blown away by how much time is wasted at the beginning of every single project about how that project is going to get tackled. I mean, that example is one way in which firms will tackle a project, right? Multiple buildings on a campus site, like for a school, multiple floors, core and shell. And this is like a hours long discussion with multiple people every single time. Yep.
It's painful. And then they go about it, and then they halfway through, they want to get some more benefit from their data because they feel their data's dark, but they haven't modeled it in a way which gives them any extra insight. It does make me kind of question workflows, how they have workflows. I think when the Open Letter came out, I spoke to Bob McNeil, and I said, well, he just said, I'm fed up of answering the phone to all these large architectural firms that are telling me what they want. And when you detail it, they actually all want different things, because there's no one wants the same thing, because they've all got different workflows. And
That's
this
my concern with 39 firms like putting money into the pot to develop something is who's going to decide, right? Because to that point right there, it's just
well,
it's
I saw Greg,
incredibly challenging problem.
I saw Greg Schleusner go from "this is the way" HOK to starting to talk to people, and then suddenly he's like going, I can't go around assuming that this is actually the way that everyone works, or that we've got the best way of doing it. And so that was quite an experience. And there's a big question: should practices be doing software development? Period. Should they be involved? And I believe we've got to a point where we have in-house expertise in the industry that can guide the software companies better than before, when, the last thing you want, this is what normally happens, is you have a board meeting, the head of some large software firm is going to rock up, it's the CEO and the VP, and you think you're going to have a one-to-one frank discussion with them about what it is that you want. And they turn up and they show you something that they're going to launch in 6 weeks' time. They spent 18 months developing with some California firms, and they think, isn't this great? And you'll be able to buy this. And it's like, well, that's not really answering our problem. This meeting really isn't, it's not a sales meeting. It's not for you to tell us how much feedback do Skanska get to give in software development? And that's why these guys are spending a lot of time with these startup firms, and they're shining a little light on them so that maybe they can get some of their problems sorted. But Greg is taking this approach of, there is a much bigger problem that if we crack, that if we are no longer, you'll be able to use whatever, it turns any BIM system into a HTML, because all you're doing is producing components, BIM components, and those BIM components go to the BIM component database in the sky, and you can swap, you can hire an ArchiCAD user, it doesn't matter. It's suddenly
the browser.
Yeah. And if it's a skill bet, you can hire people with the skill sets that you want without having this kind of draconian, I only hire people who do this, I only hire people who use that. And there are going to be different CAD systems that come along that people are going to want to move. I think, people like Snapshot, for instance, on its feature set. I mean, I saw a video today of somebody reviewing Arcol and saying, it's kind of like SketchUp. And I was like, this isn't even beta software. This is a software company that sees a problem, wants to put BIM on the cloud. Don't limit your thoughts to it, what it can do now. You have to think about, these are the fundamental basics that have to be built before you go for the higher stuff. And so, you might think about using it for conceptual design tools because it's not deep enough, but this is years of development. Snapshot is at least 5 years of development before it gets to 80% of Revit. The whole capabilities of Revit, if you think of all the years, even though it might have had 5 years of having hardly anything done to it, it's had a hell of a lot of development to do all those edge cases that were when they were in the mode for changing and doing stuff. And I think that is that's something that people don't realize with software development, is what you're seeing now is literally just the base rocks, and these guys are all aiming for the sky. They're all aiming for the stars. Now the question mark is going to be funding, and who's going to get behind them, and they're going to have continual funding to keep going, or are these guys going to get eaten up? And I have to ask everybody that the only way you're going to get different software to play with, to add to your tool sets, is if you give them some time. Play with them, give them your feedback. If you can pay them some money for development, maybe it's for features that you want, do it, because they need to have, there's this really strange, the thing I've come to discover that's strange, it seems to be fairly easy to get money, maybe like 500 grand to start your company, your software company. And That's great. And then you sort of develop something. And then you've got a framework. You might have something that you can show. But when you go back for more money for Series A, they're kind of like saying, well, what traction have you got? Well, I've got this kind of like thing. It's not really, yeah, but you've got to get some traction. And maybe if you can, I'll give you half of what you want. If you can get someone else, then I'll give it. And so I had this very strange conversation at Next Build 2 years ago where someone said, this Michael Mark, I'm not interested in anything under $3 million. Oh, wow. Right. Okay. Well, I'll keep that in mind whenever I speak to anyone. But there are so many firms that I'm asking for that kind of money, but you can't get a VC interested because of the risk reward for them at 500,000 isn't worth it. So there's this strangulation point. And then how can they show traction? If the AEC kind of companies are sniffing around, maybe trying it, but they're not actually giving them any money, then they're not going to be around because they can't get any more funding. So it's really, really important that the AEC industry looks at these startups. If they're interested in some of the stuff they're doing, invite them in, play with it, try and get them to develop some of the stuff you want, pay them. It's like, that's corn feed money. It's a tiny amount of money could be enough to say, hey, we've got these firms interested, and then they can go back and get VC funding to fund them for another couple of years. But it's, if you saw the VC panel session at Dev, the other thing is that this year there's money, but next year's there doesn't look to be a lot of money. So if you've started this year, fill your boots, because you might be starving through next year before you can go back to the market again. And it's, these are the kind of dynamics that you just don't think about. I had no comprehension of. But I am so excited that there are so many good ideas coming through, and I wanted to showcase them. And I knew it was kind of, doing Next Dev and having one track was kind of like, all right. And then that became 2 tracks, and all these people loved them. I mean, I didn't have really budget for Next Dev at all. These guys all flew in from wherever around the world to give their 20, 30-minute demos. And I said, look, I don't know if anyone's going to be in the room because now I know what Aaron's going to do, but if I'll video it and then we're going to promote it. And so, this is a good launch point for you. And they all love them. They all did it to however many people were in the room. But it was, mergers and acquisition people are watching the videos. It's possible to go in and see stuff. It does have life after the day. But I didn't realize by having, I think we had about 70 or 80 speakers. There's an order of magnitude larger than normal. So I was like juggling, but we had 9 people on a panel, which was incredibly crazy. It was, but they were all fantastic people. They all got to have a say, not necessarily as in depth as perhaps with the AI stuff, but we've learned some lessons. Next year will be a little bit different. And 40 minutes isn't long enough to discuss some of these topics because, I could have done a whole morning with Aaron and then the architects discussing issues. And it's very important that the people in the audience get to ask their questions. So it becomes, I don't want just talking heads. I want the audience to also have their point of view shared. And then we went all day. We went through down different little kind of alleyways all day through different people saying things. And there's a lot of people who've been around for a long time who just don't believe that change is coming. Hopefully, changey stuff is. So we had quite a bit of that. And British people are quite well known for it. But the other thing that happened is pretty much like the back end of my LinkedIn. So I've got people contacting, do you know this guy? Can you put me in touch with this guy? I was like, okay. And then all those people were in a space for 2 days. So I could say, you need to speak to that guy, you need to speak to that guy, and it could happen. And then the night before, during the drinking evening, Aaron was talking to Jess, who's a VC, who was talking to I think he was talking to one of the guys from Spaces, that's now co-design. And Aaron just said, where on earth can you find in a bar an architect talking to a VC and a software developer about licensing models? And they were, Aaron could have done a whole morning on licensing models and the pain that it causes companies. It's not going away. We're definitely going to do it again. I think we've kind of sparked something. And the great thing is that, I kind of have said privately, I said, well, Autodesk had this access to all of these guys for 3 years after the open letter to get this information. But it's not true, because it was always in that Revit construct, that the walls of Revit were limiting the conversation. And I think what we did with Dev was we took the walls off, and even Autodesk would find things that they wouldn't have found out in the 3 years of those discussions that they had in the future of Revit, because by freeing yourselves of your constraints, funnily enough, then you can actually think clearly. And I think that the Open Letter Group did a fantastic job of kicking off that debate and doing some of that kind of out of the box thinking. And the VCs were fascinated, because it was, I kind of thought McKinsey were in the room. I was thinking, what McKinsey report would ever have this information? And, it's just absolutely fantastic stuff. To hear it from that was the real concept of the day, was VCs, they said, we already know the software companies. They're interested in hearing from the actual users. Software developers wanted to speak to the VCs and the users. And the actual users wanted to talk to both, because their pain points are business models and capability. And so it was kind of like a slightly wonky, but a three-legged stool. And then it's free for everyone to go and just watch, listen, think. I had some negative feedback from some software developers who are really unhappy with the discussion about licensing models, because it's as if they don't would want any models aren't good enough for them. And it's well, try just talking to them. Don't copy Autodesk. Don't copy who copied Adobe, who then got. Everyone's copying each other on business models as to how much they can extract from people, and there is a limit. And you're at the back of the queue depending on your product. There's a lot of software companies that completely overrate the value of their service or products to the customer, and at some point those customers make a decision to remove it, and it's happening. Adobe, as I said, is getting a kicking over here, and same in the States, I think, as well. And people at some point people will go, why does 2D CAD cost so much? I mean, that stuff's as old as the ark. I mean, why are you paying so much for a license of 2D drawing software? I mean, it's insane if you think about it. It's probably, if you do the math, I'm sure Autodesk will write in and say something like, well, AutoCAD hasn't gone up in price over 10 years, and due to inflation, it's actually decreased in value. It's been about the same price for whatever. I kind of feel that tools cost too much, and the things that you only have to go and speak to people like Bob McNeil, or anyone who works with Bob McNeil or buys from Bob McNeil. No one ever complains about how much Rhino costs. No one ever complains about how much Grasshopper costs, because it doesn't. They only complain about how often he updates the software, as opposed to how little he updates it. And it's not, it's love. People actually can feel love for a software company. And then you go to this sort of volume products, when the love is evaporating or is long gone. I don't know. I'm quite passionate about that element of it. I think, companies that come along, Enscape or another way, they were always good for their customers. It's like building that communication. It's much easier to do when you've got a small number. I'd hate to be in Autodesk's position trying to please so many customers who are all doing different things, who have all different workflows, different in-house capabilities. But ultimately, everyone gets treated pretty much the same is the bottom line there. Yeah, but I think the industry's heading for a better place, and what we're trying to do is to have a look under some of the rocks so that we can see what's coming. Try and encourage these startups that are doing interesting things. Connect people. That's another important thing. And then also, speak truth to power. I think that is something that will always be in my DNA. And it helps. There's nothing wrong with complaining. If you've got a valid complaint, then all you're doing is helping somebody. It might not look like helping, but it is. If you listen, then you're helping. And if you do something, it's even better. Because they're probably not the only people complaining.
Right.
And this is
for every one that complains, there's 100 more that are just nodding their heads right behind him.
I can go into nearly any EBA agreement customer and outline the sales pitch pattern, and every time they've done it, go, yep, it's the same, and that kind of galls me. So sales is sales, and Autodesk is amazing in its managed to keep its sales. Its resellers, I know that they've all kind of collapsed into these huge, big firms, but I am amazed that they're still there, because it's the only companies that I know where it's your own company, but really you don't have a lot of say in it, because so much is dictated by your franchisee or whatever it almost is. And then the software, and the thing I'm not looking forward to is when software gets complicated. So all the new stuff is great. It's easy to get into, quick to learn. You can spend 4 hours on a call and you pretty much know what it can do. The problem is in 10 years' time, that software would have had... the real skill is trying to keep old software simple to use. And I think the industry needs to learn a few more lessons in how it does that. No one does it.
That was one of the big points in the standards talk that Aaron gave, right? Just the complexity of the software alone is where everybody's spinning their wheels trying to figure out how to draw the things that they have to draw that day. And I mean, my wife's a Revit user, and as an example, and every day it's like the hand goes up multiple times. How do I find where's this thing? Which way did they choose to go about doing it today? Works for different architects. They all do it differently, right? And so
it was the same with AutoCAD. Was
reality.
Yeah, even in release 12, there were about 13 different ways to do dimensioning, and it always gets complicated because people ask for things and they put it in the software, and it's yet another feature which they don't have to support for another 10 years. Well, they had another whole lot of stuff on it. It's from layer upon layer upon layer, and
some features need expiration dates, right?
It's like I love Graphisoft rewrote the stair tool completely, and those kind of things excite me. They're not particularly exciting, but it's like you get to a point where you know what, there is a better way of doing this,
right?
And you run the fear of upsetting your customers because you've changed the way something is hallowed that is used all the time runs, and you're gonna. I mean, for the longest time, I remember around 2010, nearly every release of Revit seemed to change where functions were. There was like hunt the feature through all the different menus because you just didn't know what they were doing, and then eventually they kind of learned that isn't really a sustainable way of working. So things kind of settle down. And again, software companies always tell me, we don't know how to size up these portions. Are we giving people too much per year? Too little? How much is right before, and when you see a release come out with 200 features, oh God, oh boy, there is some working that needs to be done here. So that subscription forced this yearly update mentality as opposed to 2 or 3 years, whatever we were having before. It was very difficult for Autodesk, I know, to size that portion. Some were too big, some were too small. And then, some products just don't need updating. You just kind of think, AutoCAD, what's been added to it that's really useful?
Yeah, who knows?
And then, it's like, and then there's this, the other thing that's interesting. So even though AutoCAD is huge, it's everywhere, everyone knows it, they're still selling more of it every year. I'm sure there's LT. In Japan, there was this moment when Autodesk removed LT from the market and they dropped AutoCAD to the same price as LT. And that was there for a couple of years. And it sort of transpires, I think, that they were under some pressure from BricsCAD and GraberCAD, because all of those had they reverse engineered or rebuilt the APIs that went along in AutoCAD. So you could still run code and expand it and do. And in Japan, that's a big thing. Doing customization is a big thing. And LT at the price didn't have that because obviously it was removed. And so they removed it from the market, brought in AutoCAD. But now they've just introduced LT with capabilities of running apps and stuff and developing apps on top of it. So I think Autodesk has sensed that it needed to be defensive against these kind of like startups. I know BricsCAD had one of the best years they've ever had last year. I know Graybird had a fantastic year as well. So either the whole market's floating, or there is some kind of decision making, specifically in the Asia world, so Korea, Japan area, where again they might be having this moment of, Adobe, it's really expensive. Maybe this kind of like cheaper stuff, which has pretty much the same stuff on the tin. Maybe we should be trying that. And so I'm kind of wondering if we're heading towards more of that. And I think with a cloud-based world and the desktop apps Autodesk have got, maybe there is this time when, CAD, 2D CAD, might be the thing that you've got on your desktop. And that's the thing that you use, while modeling software is the stuff that's on the cloud. But you end up with buying lower cost apps to do some of this stuff. But then if you're, again, you're going to be doing a lot of 2D detailing on automatically on the cloud. But I'm looking at Rayon this week. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they've done. The demos look amazing. I don't know if you've seen that. It's kind of Figma for AutoCAD for Figma AutoCAD. But it's more specific to architecture than you'd expect. This is Rayon, and they're based in France, in Paris. So that could be another kind of challenge. Because I was thinking, so you've got things like Arcool and Snaptrude, which are proving that you can do some pretty decent rectilinear models, BIM, but then you don't necessarily want to detail it out fully, but you might want drawings from it. Well, Rayon, if there was a link with Rayon, you could take to that. Or if you have spaces on your iPad and you've modeled a kind of skin of a building, you know where the floors are. If there was a link between that and Rayon, you could do the 2D drawings, and you could also make edits, which would then maybe change spaces. So, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be this all-encompassing huge BIM system that you have to learn. You can just use 2 cloud-based apps and get drawings out or do experimental layouts. If Rayon linked to Finch 3D, for instance, all those kind of 2D drawing, if you have the walls of the building, then the AI can take care of the layout and you can just make some edits. I think these things are so exciting. I think Finch 3D were very hard to get hold of and very hard to convince because their software isn't really ready for the prime time. And so they came over and they said they'd show it. But I think loads of people are going to freak out when that stuff comes out because they've really got a very, very good idea of what it is that they're solving for architects. So I was very happy to have Paul, Jesper, and Pam over.
I think one of the big pieces, I mean, that it was said over and over again, is the best tool for the job. And like, that's what you're speaking to right now. You're speaking to use this tool for this part, use this tool for this part. Why? Because they're incredibly adept at that part and they can focus solely on solving for that piece of it. And if the data can flow freely between these, then it makes a ton of sense. And firms and people who are in practice would be willing to spool those up when they need them. I think that's another important part about this is I don't need the design tool the whole time. I don't need the documentation tool the whole time. I don't need the presentation tool the whole time.
But it has to be easy enough to pick up and leave.
It's so hard. Yeah, it does. It really. I want to be able to turn it on and off whenever I need it. And it is interesting to see how Autodesk now has, and I think it was brought up during where the guy from the analyst presentation, the industry analyst, was talking about. He was talking about how there was the new token system for Revit where you could buy tokens and just turn it on and off, just use it whenever you want to use it. And it takes a token away. It's like putting a coin into the pinball machine, right? It's like when you play it, you put a coin in and it's interesting to see that kind of thing coming from such a big company. I mean, it makes sense to me where I'm not going to use Revit, but more than 3 times a month. So why should I pay for it for the entire month? It does make sense, but it's interesting to how it is going to get so granular. Now I have to manage all that as a user or as a firm, and that could be.
Firms are having to do that already. People on EBA agreements who have moved to token-based systems, they have to predict their usage for 3 years, and if they undershoot it, then they have to buy more tokens at a higher price. So they end up obviously losing.
Penalty.
And if they overshoot it, they end up with tokens that they not spent. The only way to keep them alive is to take on another agreement. There's the house always wins. I mean, this is essentially it's a casino. I see cloud tokens as being bitcoins. It's an Autodesk crypto. I think flexibility is good. If those crypto coins it's all about value. Does it save any money? Is it worth value? But the problem is that Revit is not a product that you can switch on and off. And if you only use Revit 3 times in a month, I hate to see how good you are at it in a year, because you have to keep using this stuff to keep the muscle memory and the flexibility. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting your time. I think the cloud unit or the cloud token is literally a whole day. It's 24 hours, 12 hours, I think. So there's no smaller. You're not renting it for an hour or by the hour. Okay. It's kind of like one day. That's your unit, and everyone pays differently for those units. So the EBA agreement, which is under an NDA, dictates your personal company price of however many those cloud credits are. As an individual outside, I'm guessing there's going to be like a very standard price that you will be paying, but it'll be a lot more than these other guys. But one company with an EBA agreement in America will be paying a different price per crypto coin for a cloud coin than one in Sweden or Norway. And it's all kind of hidden behind their EBA agreements. And so that's kind of an issue where it should be dollars. The whole idea of having this kind of arbitrary fake coinage really doesn't
currency.
Unit. It doesn't give clarity to the industry as to what they're paying, or what the industry's paying, or if you're being ripped off, or if you're got a really great deal, So there was no way the Autodesk will want to change the model to the point where it makes less than 4 billion a year. It's got to be about growth. So whatever the new business model is going to be, it's not particularly clear yet what that will be with this kind of move to the cloud versus what they've got at the moment. How can you do non-compliance when you're you're using Forma and all your software is on Forma. Autodesk makes a lot of money from non-compliance, and suddenly that non-compliance money will disappear if there's no way to accidentally install or copy or whatever. So what would be how will you replace the non-compliance money? How will you, at the moment, I think the open letter group said that they get 39 applications in the collections or the suite, whatever it's called. On average, they only install 4 of them. Yeah, and so it's AutoCAD, Revit, 3D Studio Max, and Navisworks. Those are the rest of it is rarely ever installed. And so that makes it worth their while buying a collection, just those 4 on its own out of 39. But if you start mixing and matching with other tools, at what point do you not need to have that kind of like big collection? So that'll be another kind of issue for Autodesk to address in terms of how much does it cost to have? Can you have like Mr. Potato Head and instead of these are the 39, maybe you pick out of a suite a bunch of features and services now that you can use. I think the one thing we know is that Autodesk does like changing its business model and adapting its business model to squeeze the laminata. We have to wait and see how that goes. Customers, I think the one thing that I'm concerned about anyway, is the next move means putting your data on a server. It's not going to be your server. It's going to be your vendor's server. And, it's suddenly, how do you get your data out? Can you get your data out? If you want to migrate or move elsewhere, how can you do that? How can you terminate some of these agreements? How do you know what they're doing to your data? What are you letting them do to it? As it is, nearly all software is automatically reporting back all the time to base, telling people what you're doing, giving them insight into how you use the software, what functions you use, what you spend most of your time doing, and they hopefully use that to improve the product and stuff. But it can be used in a business case way.
Well, look at your cell phone.
Yeah.
I mean, people are pretty oblivious to it, but talk about reporting back, right? I mean, different apps with different qualifiers for everything under the sun there that's reporting back on your usage, your location.
I always tell my friends with Chromebooks that they're basically running a virus. It's there, reporting back every single thing they do. And part of the free software and all the Google Nice apps and stuff is that you're literally selling your entire usage back to them as knowledge. We haven't got quite that far back, that bad in there's no kind of advertising model in that yet. But when I talk to Graphisoft, seem very much against that, against cloud-based models, at least pure cloud. They think it's insecure. That's the story they're telling me. But
there's a lot of firms who can't do that either, right? They can't have their data off premises for the type of project that they're working on. Yeah.
Well, I think Autodesk is kind of suffering at the moment that there's a lot of people with Autodesk ACC that need some kind of special governmental approval in the States for defense stuff. And I think they've been promising it for a number of years that they're getting. It still hasn't come. And they're kind of getting a bit upset about, I need this. I need this so I can use these tools on this job.
Right.
And I've only come across that a couple of times. I haven't seen, I think COVID got rid of a lot of people's worries in that it's just enabling people to downsize their offices. There's a hell of a lot going on now. People are in 2 or 3 times a week, if that. Mm-hmm. So we really are working in a very distributed way. And I don't think it's going to change because I'm seeing really large corporations here, not necessarily architects, making substantial changes to the amount of office space they're letting. This is multi-year, forever decisions. And it's happening. This is going to stick. It's not short term. And the generation that complain about it are the ones that are kind of in God's waiting room. They're not necessarily the younger people, because quality of life is so much better to work from home if you can. I know people with children, maybe a willful dog, but it's we were always kind of in a world where change was a given. But I think in the last 5 years, the amount of change that we've done has shown that we're very adaptable as a species, and we're willing to roll with it. And the cloud stuff, even though it wasn't selling, has saved people's asses. And I think that it'll continue to change the way that people work. I just really hope that that the way things work are actually for the benefit of customers, not just shareholders and not just business models. And I think with Next Build and Next Dev will continue. We'll have a new batch of startups next year doing different things. We're going to have some more VCs, maybe some more Americans, because the American market for VC is so much more, it's so much more engaging. In Europe, you have to have a product that's ready to go before you get much funding. People in America are much more likely to make a bet. There's something inherent in American culture, which is to be admired in terms of taking risks. I mean, you guys crossed that continent not knowing what the hell's on the other side of it. I think that still continues. So I think I always get very envious when I go to Boston. So on the Mechanical CAD side, nearly all 3D printing came out of Boston. Then you got PTC, Onshape, John Hirschig, SolidWorks. Everything. The Boston area for MCAD is huge. When you go there on the startup environment, and you go to these incubating buildings, the buildings for incubators, and you talk to these young kids with these amazing ideas, and it's so inspiring, and it's concentrated. We don't have that. We just don't get the same level of intensity and the same risk taking. So the majority of firms that came over were America, Canada, Israel, Scandinavia seems to be a little bit better. But yeah, the UK is not a brilliant part for that. But the idea is we have a brilliant city in which to hold the event. We've got so many construction and architectural firms that are global there. And now running it 2 days mean people are more likely to fly in. So they're more likely to come in for both days. Yeah. But there's a limit to how many people I can fit in the space I've got. The idea of Next Build was going to be the top 100 AEC firms, and now it's 450 people. I think my limit for the room is 500. So I've still got to try and keep the kind of the same quality of people in the space. And now I'm kind of adding to it by adding VCs and software developers. So we'll wait and see. You might have to move dev depending on how many people want to come to it. But yeah, it was a risk. We didn't have it funded. We got some sponsorship from Lenovo and NVIDIA, who were brilliant. Didn't ask for anything. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who wants to come next year. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people from these software companies that now want to come and sit there and listen. It was great we had DPR, so we didn't just have We had a kind of international group of speakers as well, but I'm hopefully going to get more American companies over. But there is a cultural thing where American firms don't like rocking the boat too much. But in private, they're saying exactly the same things that I'm getting from everyone else. But politically, there are bigger risks deemed to saying exactly how you feel in a public forum. So, and the great thing about Dev was because there was no Autodesk, no Graphisoft, no Trimble, there was no exhibition per se. It was essentially totally devoid of the main players. They were there in the audience. They sent people from their strategies and from strategic development, but they weren't dictating the event. And I go to so many events where, because someone is exhibiting, they're expecting to talk, and it's kind of like, no, they're just going to give you a sales pitch. And so that's the one thing with NextDev and Next Build is that, I don't really care. If you're doing something interesting, if you've got something that I think is valid, then you can talk, but it'd have to be in the context of something. And this time, I think I was chatting with Richard Harpham and Charlie from DPR, and they just said, as an event to go to, it was a unique experience because no one was there to put their BIM colors in it or their product. It was very much based on customers talking. VCs were kind of like the latter part, and then software devs took their opportunities where they could to have some corridor conversations, and they had that one room which was like a machine gun of demos. But yeah,
they weren't standing in the shadows of any large player that really does kind of tend to overshadow any one event.
And to be honest, I think all of them have mergers and acquisitions. All of them have individuals whose job it is to go and look at the market and see if there's any technology they should buy. And I think all of them have accessed those videos or were there on that day to have a sniff around. I mean, even Dassault Systems, M&A, and people I wouldn't expect. So it's a place to come to see the stuff you're not going to see. I mean, a lot of it. Conic, the Secret Squirrels over in Belgium. Eric, I love to bits, but they're Secret Squirrels, and their software isn't even in beta, and it won't be till the end of this year. And yet they were willing to come over and talk about what they were developing. Fitch 3D, again, not even in beta. They were willing to talk about it. Paul from Arcol kind of was oohing and ahhing, and he sort of pulled out. He's very, very precious about what he's in the middle of doing that now. It just wasn't good timing for him. So I think Snaptree were on V2, so they were kind of commercial. Matty Rosemanith, I don't think that stuff. He just launched half of his application, which is that kind of sketch tool, but the other stuff is yet to come out. So it's a bit annoying when you go to a conference, you see something cool and you actually can't buy it, or you can't do anything because they're in front of you. So I think Swap and Snaptree were the only two players to actually have commercial products out of 9 or 10 people who gave presentations. All the rest of it you couldn't buy, but you might be able to sign up for later. So that was
like Hypar. You could.
Oh, Hypar, you can as well.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they're fun watching those guys. I mean, Ian's very funny, and I always love talking to him, and because you just follow his Twitter, and he kind of he's always seemingly anti-IFC, so we had a good conversation about that. But Hypar's gone through several rethinks, and the technology is still the same. It's just how it's pointing and the orientation of who they're talking to. And I think they've really got a really good story now, and they're working with DPR to do some very, very interesting stuff. If that takes off, that's another direction there where BIM, there's this huge problem in fabrication, digital fabrication. Linking design to digital fabrication is a mess, an absolute mess. And Hypar working with DPR, the connection capability of them also, you can speak into it and it'll design something. Okay, fine, tick. A nice execution of a parlor trick, but working with DPR, all of those components in that conceptual building can be swapped for one-to-one representations of the model. So you can go from conceptual to full one-to-one fabrication model in a flick of a switch.
Right.
That's mind-blowing. That could be big. And that would totally annihilate the design modeling in any tool. But then that could only be maybe that's the construction BIM for QA. Maybe that will never be the design model. Who knows? But I think all the VCs are looking for. I'm just looking for a design tool. They're looking for a design tool that can somehow drive fabrication. Fabrication. I had a VC lady contacted me before we ran Dev. I had a conversation with her, and it was pretty clear that maybe she didn't really know that much about the industry and was kind of learning. And so we had a half an hour call. Not all came out of it. And then she contacted me after Dev and just said, okay, we're looking for firms that can remove architects. And I'm like, what? There isn't one piece of software that was demoed anywhere that could remove an architect. There is no such thing. You're still going to need people who've got indemnity. You still need people to check everything. There is no way you can remove that entire. There might be fewer of them, but it's not necessarily. So this is the kind of the next kind of set of conceptual problems that we're going to be facing is the VCs are going to be looking to knock out part of the industry because they think that it's possible with AI. Yeah. So we can, in that industry, we can get rid of the lawyers. In that industry, we can get rid of the doctors.
Everybody wants to get rid of somebody. The architects want to get rid of the plan checkers, right? As an example.
Yeah. Well, and then with AI, everyone's thinking, oh my God, they're going to steal my designs. But at the same point, all the same companies are talking to me saying, what we really want is an internal AI that learns from our designs so that we can get rid of our people. We get rid of our people, not other people get rid of us. And I'm like, wow. So everyone's going to AI each other. It's just like these big, huge whacking sticks at some point.
Right.
And I think at that point it becomes very difficult to predict the future because what it gets settled upon is nothing that we can possibly imagine at the moment.
All right, that's where I'm cutting off the conversation for part 1. Join us in the next episode where we'll jump back in and continue with part 2. See you next week. Thanks to our sponsors and thanks to our members this week. Find out how you can become a member at trxl.co. And I'll talk to you again next week.